TNA has had moments that made fans believe they could become a real counterweight in American pro wrestling. But time and again, TNA ended up shooting itself in the foot with massive signings. When you bring in legends, former main eventers, or names big enough to pop ratings, fans expect stories that feel worthy and pushes that build the future. Yet far too often, it all turned into misplaced spotlight, bland feuds, and missed opportunities slipping away. Today, let's call out the most painfully wasted signings. Let's get into it right now. Wrestling Sphere, go! Number 11. Ric Flair. If you want the clearest picture of TNA signs a huge name and still doesn't know how to use him, Ric Flair is it. The irony is brutal. Flair's most remembered, most loved TNA moment isn't a classic match, isn't a storyline explosion, it's Jay Lethal doing a Flair impression on TV. A few minutes that made people laugh, and that was that. And I genuinely hope the massive money they spent bringing the Nature Boy in was worth those handful of minutes. In 2010, Flair entered TNA's newest era alongside Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff. For a lot of fans, Flair's name alone was more exciting than the other two. He didn't carry that, wherever he goes, the place burns down vibe, and he didn't have the reputation of personally sinking an entire company. In theory, Flair was premium seasoning. Stand in the corner, talk a little, and the whole show instantly feels classier, meaner, and more historic. Then TNA made their first big slip, casting Flair as a heel. At that stage of his career, nobody wanted to boo him, especially after the emotional farewell fans had already seen elsewhere. Flair was someone people wanted to respect, to hear from, to watch him pass the spotlight to the next generation, not someone they wanted to whistle and jeer. Turning a legend into a villain when the audience has no desire to hate him is basically snapping the biggest benefit he brings right in half. And the in-ring part? Same deal. People didn't need Flair stepping back into the ring, just because. If you were going to do it, it had to be a long road, a year-long story, a heavy provocation, a situation that truly forces him to suit up one last time like it's a ritual. Not just tossing him into a match with Sting that feels like, who aged worse? TNA briefly had the right idea when they tried forming a four-horseman flavored group with Fortune. With discipline and a clear direction, that could have made Flair the power center, the connector, the recruiter, the guy shaping the future. But then they ruined it the way they always do. Too many bodies, a diluted concept, and everyone turning on each other until nobody benefits. Flair is one of the greatest talents in wrestling history, and the painful truth is, very few promoters ever really know what to do with him. Sadly, TNA wasn't an exception. In their hands, the Nature Boy wasn't a passing torch. He was a legendary name burned up in the most wasteful way possible. Number 10. Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash walked into TNA with an aura not many people have. The second he showed up, mainstream fans saw it. That's a guy who's been on top. Big Sexy was still beloved then, one of those stars who doesn't need an introduction. Tall and lanky, that slow, casual swagger, and the sense he could make anything feel like his story with one look. With a presence like that, TNA should have treated Nash like a tool. Use him in the right spot to lift the entire show, not park him in the corner and wheel him out when convenient. And to be fair, Nash did get a couple of notable singles pushes. But most of the time, he fell into stand there and look good mode. More like scenery in someone else's story. The frustrating part is that TNA actually touched something truly right, and then let go. Paparazzi Productions with Alex Shelley is the clearest example. That was Nash in his sweet spot, arrogantly funny, effortlessly lazy in the best way, but still unmistakably the big-time guy. The pairing felt like a clever remix of the old Shawn Michaels, Diesel dynamic. A sharp young talker, a giant who knows how to play mind games, and together they created segments that were entertaining and storyline-driven. More importantly, it opened the door for Shelley to level up, because when a name like Nash chooses to stand next to you, you automatically look more important. Then TNA pulled the plug. They cut off what was working and shoved Nash into a bland singles run where he didn't get to do what he does best. And when Nash started doing jobs to guys like Samoa Joe, that should have been a major moment. The new monster topples the old monument. Instead, the feud wasn't built strongly enough, the match wasn't framed like a true event, and the win didn't land with real impact. In the end, Nash and TNA felt like a huge name placed in the wrong lane. It looked impressive on paper, but the effect was strangely muted. Number 9. Mickie James. Oh, Mickie. What a waste. This is the kind of situation where you can see it instantly. TNA had a name with enough class to lift an entire division, but they never really knew where to place her. Mickie left WWE feeling underused, so when she showed up on Impact, fans basically flipped the expectation switch. Finally, Mickie gets to be Mickie, a true star, not just a famous name from before. The problem is, if anyone backstage in TNA had actually watched Mickie over the years, they would have understood what made her explode wasn't just her in-ring ability. Mickie got over because she could tell stories with her eyes, with emotion, with that sweet but scary edge she had as the obsessed love interest chasing Trish. That vibe was magnetic, different, and impossible to ignore. Yet TNA steered her into a predictable babyface lane and even dressed her in a cowgirl-style look, something that already feels offbeat compared to what fans actually wanted to see. And the way they pushed her was weird, too. She arrives and instantly gets framed as the babyface who's better than the entire Knockouts division combined. Times 2, plus 7. It sounds strong, but it's a double-edged sword. Because when you lift one person that high without building credible challengers, you don't create top tier. You create emptiness. Mickie wins feel automatic. Her presence becomes a foregone conclusion, and nobody around her benefits. The rare exception was Tara, another WWE alum with enough name value to at least make things feel like, this is a match worth watching. But if the rest of the division isn't filled with worthy threats, Mickie becomes an investment that doesn't pay off. What TNA should have done was turn her into the measuring stick. Let her work with homegrown talent, tell longer stories, and most importantly, let her elevate the knockouts who were built in that company. Without that, it's just an expensive kind of waste. At least during that run, she met Magnus, and they ended up getting married. In a way, that's a happy ending. Just not the one that happened on screen. Number 8. Mick Foley. The moment Mick Foley set foot in TNA, a lot of people had the same first reaction, oh, this is big. Foley wasn't just a famous name. He was an Attitude-Era icon, the kind of presence that instantly brings back memories of a wild, intense, emotional time. More importantly, he left WWE while fans still cared and still respected him. That's a rare kind of value. He walks out, the crowd leans in. He speaks, people listen. But TNA quickly pulled him into the familiar orbit. Kurt Angle, Jeff Jarrett, and the same old main event carousel. Foley should have been the bridge between generations. The guy in the middle who can elevate younger talent while making the whole story feel bigger. Instead, he got locked into safe interactions. Stuff Foley could always make work, but that didn't truly benefit anyone around him. Even worse, TNA had a clear opportunity and still let it slip. That brief angle with Alex Shelley. That pairing had real magic potential. Shelley had the skills and the personality. He just needed a credible anchor so fans would view him as important. Foley could have been that launchpad. A few well-timed promos, a properly told rivalry, then a finish where Foley puts Shelley over and makes him feel like he belongs. But they dropped it, like TNA took one small bite and said, nah, we're good. Instead, Foley got dragged back into that goofy commissioner-style role from 2000, an act that already felt dated by 2008, let alone later on. He kept popping up on TV, rubbing shoulders with Sting, Hogan, Jarrett. Names so familiar the show sometimes felt like it was running on nostalgia fumes. And the lowest point of Foley's time, there was absolutely his involvement in the ECW reunion that turned into pure second-hand embarrassment. EV 2.0. Yes, Foley even held the TNA heavyweight world title at one point. But a title without the right story and the right placement can end up being just a line on a resume instead of a defining moment. Foley was still a fantastic ambassador, reliable presence, weight to his words, someone who made the brand feel more legit just by being there. TNA just never treated him like a true asset. And in the end, they crossed paths, ran together for a stretch, and still never created a run worth remembering. Number 7. Booker T. Talking about Booker T in TNA comes with a strange feeling. You know this is a top-tier name, a guy with champion aura, someone the crowd recognizes instantly. But once he landed in TNA, everything just slid right off. It's genuinely hard to point to a moment that makes you stop and go, yep, that's Booker T. Let me think. Yeah. Nothing really stands out. And that nothing is the sad part. To be fair, Booker has to wear some of it. On screen, he often came across like he was mentally checked out, working his shift, eyes drifting somewhere else, like he was wondering what Stevie Ray was up to, or just counting down to payday. At the same time, TNA management did him no favors. They didn't give him a clear goal, didn't build a role that demanded he fight for something, and didn't craft a story that forced fans to care. His first feud was Bobby Roode, which sounds right on paper. Veteran star versus rising guy, the classic passing the torch setup. The problem was they didn't click. The story never caught fire, the chemistry never sparked, and instead of wrapping it up clean to save momentum, they dragged it out for months. The longer it went, the flatter it felt, and when the feud went flat, Booker lost whatever little momentum he had coming in. Maybe they just didn't work well together. That happens in wrestling. The bigger issue is TNA didn't have a plan B. They didn't pivot to a different opponent, didn't adjust the approach, didn't create a fresh hook to reset Booker's presence. Slowly, he stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling like a guy who's there. By the end of his run, Booker looked like he was simply enjoying the ride, messing around with Kevin Nash, tossing out jokes, cashing a solid check. Honestly, that's a dream job if you can get it. It's just a shame that the excitement of his arrival disappeared fast, light, quick, and gone, like a spinaroonie that spins once and then, nobody claps. Number 6. Matt Morgan. Matt Morgan was the kind of signing where you look at him and think, the raw material is insane. Tall, standout physique, and a level of athleticism you just don't usually get from a big man. He had a fairly long run in TNA, and that's exactly why it stings more, because it never became what it could have been. It's like a thick book with no chapter that truly explodes. After leaving WWE, Morgan tried to fix his biggest weakness, his stutter. He worked with a speech therapist and got it under control. This should have been the turning point, the moment you go, alright, now he's complete. But instead of settling into confident, measured delivery, he swung the other way, talking a mile a minute and yelling a lot. At times, his promos sounded like he was forcing intensity, not naturally projecting menace. And for a big man to feel like a real threat, he doesn't always need to shout. He needs to own the room. In the ring, though, Morgan had something TNA rarely had in a man his size. A huge frame that moved smoothly, clean offense, and the look of someone who could crush you while still keeping up with a modern pace. He should have been built as a true test for the top guy. An athletic monster, powerful and mobile. Instead, TNA kept him living in the mid-card lane, and worse, turned him into the template of the big guy who can get pinned pretty easily. Once fans watch you take pins over and over, they stop seeing you as dangerous, no matter how tall you are. The one moment where everything felt like it might finally open up was his feud with Kurt Angle at Bound for Glory 2009. That's the kind of match that can change your career. Angle is a measuring stick, and if Morgan clears that bar, he's instantly stamped main event. The crowd was starting to rally behind him. The energy in the building was basically screaming, this is the time. If TNA had pulled the trigger, given Morgan the win, and kept pushing off that momentum, they could have created a genuine top-tier big man. But TNA went the opposite way. Angle won, and just a month later, Morgan was jobbing to Rhino in Team 3D. That's the kind of decision that kills momentum on the spot. It didn't just make Morgan lose a match, it made fans stop believing in the very story TNA had just teased. And once that belief was gone, Morgan never really got back to feeling as explosive as he did in that window. Number 5. Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan in TNA is the kind of story that makes you shake your head, but you still can't look away. The Hulkster clearly cost the company a fortune, but the harder thing to say out loud is this. Even after paying that much, TNA still managed to use him in the most wasteful way possible. If there's shame to go around, it's not just the paycheck, it's what they did with the money. Late 2009, Hogan and Eric Bischoff arrived as the start of a new era. It sounded huge, and fans immediately split. On one side was curiosity. Maybe they bring a major buzz, maybe they understand how to feel mainstream. On the other was dread. Wait, weren't these the guys in power at a massive company when things went off the cliff? Still, people gave them the benefit of the doubt. The problem is, TNA only needed a few weeks to prove that fear wasn't crazy. Old mistakes came rushing back so fast you barely had time to remember what the new era was even called. The spotlight got dragged to the newcomers. The biggest stories centered on them. New talent didn't get lifted enough. Instead of building a future, the show started running on nostalgia and ego. And the peak is this real. moment was the time the Ultimate Warrior showed up, through a mirror. It was so bizarre and awkward that the footage later got wiped off YouTube, so don't bother digging, because it'll only leave you asking, why? The irony is, if used correctly, Hogan could have added real value without doing much at all. Make him a babyface GM who shows up once an episode, speaks briefly but with purpose, gives shine to younger talent, and makes it feel like wrestling history is acknowledging the future. That's enough. Hogan didn't need to be the center of everything. He just needed to be the name that makes others look bigger standing next to him. But TNA chose the opposite path. Too much Hogan, shoved into one bad storyline after another, until a brand asset turned into pure fatigue. A massive signing, a massive opportunity, and an approach that left fans with nothing but a long, tired sigh. Number 4. Diamond Dallas Page. There was a stretch where watching TNA felt like sitting through a never-ending version of No Holds Barred, not because it was hardcore, but because it was exhausting. Exhausting choices, stories tripping over themselves, and that constant sense the show was stepping on its own toes. And in that context, DDP showing up sounded like an emotional rescue plan. A name with real shine, a guy who once made fans believe hard work could change everything. But here's the issue. DDP's WWE run before that had already become a textbook example of a big star being mishandled to the point of humiliation. Even more ironic, the closing chapter that pushed him toward retirement got tied to Bob Holly, an ending that felt both strange and bitter. So when DDP laced up again and joined TNA, you wanted this to be the make it right story. A strong feud, a meaningful match, and a finish where he passes the torch to the next generation. Instead, TNA's big plan for DDP was safe to the point of being lifeless. First, they dragged him into revisiting an old WCW-style rivalry with Raven from years earlier. Nothing fresh, just something pulled back off the shelf. Then he moved on to Jeff Jarrett, and you could practically hear the impatience. Why do I have to wait this long to beat DDP? What should have been there wasn't. DDP needed a program with someone like AJ Styles so he could do what a legend is supposed to do. Tell the story clean, make the moment matter, and put the younger guy over in a way everyone remembers. The same way Randy Savage once helped DDP, recognition, validation, the passing of the torch. Without that, DDP's run felt like a detour. Big name, big expectations, but almost no lasting payoff. Luckily, DDP had a strong life outside the ring to lean on, because otherwise, it would be hard not to feel genuinely bad about how much potential got left on the table. Number 3. Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson entered TNA with something a lot of people simply don't have, a voice that can sell a match. The moment he grabbed a mic, said a few lines, and stretched out that signature self-introduction, the crowd reacted like a switch had been flipped. At the time, TNA should have looked at Anderson as a ready-made project. Cocky, dangerous, someone who could work as an anti-hero babyface or a dirty heel. Most importantly, he had the ability to make any feud feel like it mattered. But Anderson's problem in TNA was a very TNA problem. Constant swerves. Before he could be built into a true centerpiece, the story would veer somewhere else. Just as he gained momentum, they'd hit the brakes. Just as it felt like, this guy's about to break through, he'd get dropped back into the same old cycle. Turns, allegiance flips, half-serious half-comedic segments, one after another, until the audience never had time to believe in any single version of Anderson for long. A strong talker needs two things to become a steady main event player: a clear goal and a journey with a payoff. Anderson had more than enough personality to be the focal point, but TNA often stuck him in get-through-it feuds, or floated him through groups and story lanes that diluted his character. And once you dilute someone too many times, fans stop seeing them as a special threat. They become a guy who's important one week and disposable the next. The biggest shame is that Anderson didn't need protection through non-stop wins. He needed protection through consistency. If TNA had committed to one role, built him as a long-term rival, and let him elevate others through strong promos and meaningful finishes, Anderson could have been a real pillar. Instead, he came off like a cannon that always got rolled out, but rarely got aimed in the right direction. Number 2. Rob Van Dam. RVD is the kind of name where the second the music hits, the crowd already knows what they're about to get. A different rhythm, different offense, and a kind of effortless cool. With ECW DNA that obvious, TNA should have had a natural advantage. You've got a symbol of that rebellious style, a fanbase ready to ride with him, and a roster full of people who could have made dream matches happen. On paper, that's a money formula. But TNA used RVD in a way that felt like he was there, but not really. Yes, they sometimes pushed him and placed him in big spots, but the stories around him were rarely sharp enough to make RVD feel like an irreplaceable centerpiece. He showed up a lot, wrestled a lot, but lacked the kind of arcs that make fans feel, if I miss this week, I'm missing something major. RVD became more like a high-quality performance you turn on and off, rather than a fire you build and keep burning. What TNA truly missed was RVD's best role. He could have been the bridge between the X division and the main event scene. He had enough credibility to elevate younger talent, and enough uniqueness to make an ordinary opponent look dangerous just by sharing the ring with him. If TNA had used RVD as a measuring stick, beat him and you get stamped, lose to him and you still gain something, the division naturally gets deeper. Instead, RVD often got tossed into scattered feuds or directions that didn't highlight what made him special in the first place. RVD didn't need TNA to book him like an unbeatable superhero. He just needed a structure that respected aura. Every match should mean something, every challenger should be built, and every RVD appearance should push someone forward. When that doesn't happen, a star like RVD can still make the show more fun, but he won't leave the lasting value he absolutely should have. Number 1. Taz. If you only know Taz from SmackDown, you remember a cheerful commentator who's always chuckling. But before that, Taz was the suplex machine for real. He'd step into the ring, clamp down, throw you, and drive you into the mat like he was handing out a sentence. He didn't need high-flying or flashy extras. Close the distance, lift, slam, done. The crowd instantly knew who was controlling the fight. So when TNA brought Taz in, the logical expectation was to give him a role with weight. A mentor, a spark, someone who could turn a young talent into a threat with just a few sharp promos. Samoa Joe as his protege sounded perfect. Monster meets monster, teacher meets successor. Just having Taz beside Joe, speaking less but landing every word, would have changed Joe's aura. But TNA let that story drift. It never had time to fully cook before they pivoted away. Taz passed through the main event mafia like a piece added to fill the lineup, then quickly went back to the announce desk, where he became a familiar voice instead of a real on-screen force. And that's the painful miss. Hearing Taz every week didn't make him feel bigger. It only made it feel like TNA was once again putting the spotlight on a former WWE guy, while the homegrown names still lacked the backing they needed to truly break out. If TNA had used Taz as a full-time manager, standing behind a rising star, cutting tight promos, interfering at the exact right moments, and finishing the feud by elevating his guy to the next level, that's real value. Even the role change alone would have felt fresher and helped the show lean less into that WWE voice. In TNA, Taz ended up like a powerful weapon kept on the shelf. Everyone knew it was dangerous, they just never put it in the right position to matter. So in this list, who do you think TNA wasted the most? Drop your pick in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to Wrestling Sphere, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next behind-the-scenes countdowns.